Welcome to the Peak Performance Podcast, your guide to optimizing your life one health tip at a time. This podcast is designed to entertain and inform, not to provide medical or health advice. Always consult your doctor when it comes to your personal health or before you make any changes to your diet, exercise, or lifestyle.
Welcome back to the Peak Performance Podcast. I'm Coach Kyle, and this is Dr. K.
Hey everybody, good to have you back again today, and welcome to our show.
How you doing, Dr. K?
I'm doing great. How are you, Kyle?
Good, doing good. So what are we talking about today, Dr. K?
Today we're going to talk about my favorite drug and the oldest drug in the world, methylene blue.
Oh, look at that. Methylene blue. What is methylene blue?
Methylene blue, historically, it actually started as a dye in 1876. That's when it was first made. And then kind of in 1891, they started experimenting with it as a medication because I guess they figured, sure, it dyes things blue. Let's see what it does to humans. But then they actually found there's a really good anti-malarial drug. It became the first anti-malarial drug in existence, primarily because it's what hydroxychloroquine is made from.
Very interesting. And so you said it was a dye, and then it was used to treat malaria. So when you say it's a dye, I'm assuming it's blue. It's methylene blue. And how does something that's blue actually help a disease?
So blue is, I think it just happens to be blue. It's chemically synthesized. It's not found in nature. It's just made in a lab. And blue is just a byproduct of its production. But what it does, it works in so many different pathways. And we're going to dive into each of these a little bit more. But, when I have patients that walk in the office and they're like, hey, what's that blue bag that person over there is doing? And should I do it? I go, well, I don't know. Let me give you a brief overview of the things that it does. And then we'll dive into each of those.
So on a high level, what does it do now? We know it used to treat malaria back in the day. So what do you use it for in your clinic?
Yep. So let me give you the rundown. So basically the reason I got into it in the first place is we never really had a good IV for people post-traumatic brain injuries, post-strokes, post-concussions, Alzheimer's, dementia, stuff like that. So, I started doing research and I kept hearing about this methylene blue thing. People were talking about conferences and, everyone's kind of hush-hush about it. But I started digging into it more and more, and it's become more popular over time. But one of the things it does is, I don't know if you're familiar with amyloid plaques or tau proteins. They're effectively misfolded garbage proteins that accumulate in the brain. And everyone accumulates them as we age. It's the natural part of aging. A small percent of brain cells, they just misfold. And it used to be considered that Alzheimer's was linked to a severe accumulation of tau proteins. Research is starting to shift away from that, but that was the original theory. Now, accumulation of tau proteins, that still is linked to cognitive decline. It's just not necessarily Alzheimer's specifically. They did a study where they showed if delivered preemptively, methylene blue can prevent cognitive decline and tau accumulation in mice. The trial is called REMBER, like REMBER, and it showed both cognitive and cerebral blood flow improvements for patients with mild to moderate dementia. So that's the initial reason I got into it. And then, I started doing it on patients and I started getting more into it for other things. So some of the other big things it does is it works on the NRF2 pathway, which is your primary anti-aging pathway. Basically, it makes your cells more able to accept oxygen into themselves. It's used in hospitals for methylglobinemia, which is carbon monoxide poisoning. So it can actually force these cells to accept oxygen instead of carbon monoxide, which is what they prefer. The other big things for it are it's a nootropic. It's just a brain stimulant. It's a mitochondrial stimulant. So it actually just makes your mitochondria work more effectively. But yeah, so where do you want to dive into it in the beginning?
So, that was a pretty good high level, but I want to take it even higher. So say a lay person comes into your clinic, they know absolutely nothing about methylene blue, and you have to give them 3 benefits and why they should or shouldn't do it.
Yep. Well, the thing is, it depends, because nowadays I use it for pathogens. Any kind of infection, methylene blue works really well on. It can be used topically for wound healing, for non-healing ulcers. We still use it as a nootropic. We use it for cognitive decline patients. We see really good results of cognitive decline. If someone comes to me within a tight window after having a stroke, it's actually been shown to reverse some of that brain damage. So it's honestly hard to say 3 things that it's good for.
I mean, that's a wide-ranging reach of benefits. In terms of application, you mentioned topical. How do you normally apply it? Can it be taken orally?
So yeah, there's 3 different ways to do it. It's IV, oral, and topical. So topical is obviously for wounds. My wife actually uses it as a cosmetic treatment as well. You mix methylene blue with tretinoin, and it actually has anti-aging effects on the skin. And then orally, so orally versus IV, they've done studies that show taking orally, no matter how much of it you take orally, it never reaches high enough TRO concentrations, which are blood concentrations, to get into the brain. So if we want any kind of brain healing effects, it has to be done IV. But a lot of the other benefits can be achieved orally.
Gotcha. I also, and just for the audience, I'm asking questions in order to facilitate conversation. I do know about methylene blue, so I will be putting my 2 cents in here and there. For the IV versus the oral, I believe the IV also has some effect that I've seen in the research on kidneys, a greater effect on kidneys versus the oral. Well, for the audience, we'll probably have to link to the study in the show notes, but I do believe it was either the kidneys or the liver. It actually hits those specific organ systems, that in the brain, much more actively, and helps rejuvenate. For people listening, they might not have a doctor like you nearby. So if they wanted to find methylene blue or use methylene blue, I mean, how would you go about doing that?
Well, the first thing you want to do is get something called a G6PD test. G6PD, it's a gene. It's really only it's not even prevalent. It's a really rare gene, but it's genetically to Middle Eastern descent. But it's a gene that protects red blood cells from breaking down. And quite honestly, if you're G6PD deficient and you take methylene blue, it would kill you. So definitely get tested before taking methylene blue. Apart from that, it has very little side effects. Overall, it just seems to have good effects. You can get methylene blue as a dropper from Amazon, but quality for it is super, super important. You don't want to just buy random ones because unfortunately it is lab made and it's found actually to have really high levels of mercury in it. When you make raw methylene blue, I guess somewhere in the process mercury gets introduced. So if they don't then strip out the mercury, what you're taking will have ridiculously high levels of mercury. And I'm talking like 20 parts per million, which is a lot of mercury.
Oh wow, geez, that's kind of scary. So in my past, I've used both IV and oral methylene blue when I live in Greenville, South Carolina, so I can't always drop in the clinic for an IV. So when I'm not there, I use oral methylene blue, and my vendor of choice is Dosage. It's not a store; it's actually a collective of researchers and biohackers and medical professionals, and you have to join the club in order to purchase their products. But we did get the COA from them, and Dr. K did say it was low enough in heavy metals to be safe.
Yeah, so that's really the crux of that is even if you're not getting from Mitozen, get a C of A from wherever you're purchasing it from, and then make sure that what you're getting is pharmaceutical grade, because you can even get methylene blue at the pet store. It's made for fish tanks. Do not buy that. That is very dirty methylene blue. There's also chemical or laboratory grade, which in theory sounds really good, but usually will have heavy metals in it. Lead, cadmium, arsenic are the ones usually found in chemical grade methylene blue. The only clean kind is pharmaceutical grade.
So a COA for the audience is a certificate of analysis, and they are looking for heavy metal content, correct?
Yes. Well, that's part of some. They're looking for sterility, so no bacteria in it, heavy metal content, and any other contaminants in it as well.
Okay. I mean, this is probably a general rule. If you're buying a supplement from a company who will not send you the COA on their product, I would be wary. Does that sound like that's a good thing to look for?
Oh, 100%. A C of A, it should be a publicly available document that a company that backs their product should provide. If they don't, I'd be concerned. I probably wouldn't buy it from a company that doesn't.
Yeah, if it's not posted online, some companies do post them online, and I've found that's probably the easiest way to find if it's a good vendor. If it's not posted online, what I usually do is I'll just email their support email or help email, and they'll usually provide it. If they don't provide it or don't have one, that is a very good sign that they are not going through the testing required to make sure that their products are safe. So when you say pharmaceutical grade, I believe the breakdown of that, like when you see a product that's pharmaceutical grade, it says USP. Is that correct?
Correct. That's just a testing marker. It stands for United States Pharmacopoeia. That's just what you want to see.
Okay, so don't buy methylene blue for fish tanks. Don't buy methylene blue that's chemical or testing grade. You want pharmaceutical grade USP with an available certificate of analysis.
Correct.
So methylene blue, I mean, we've talked about it for skincare. We've talked about it for like a nootropic effect. Talked about it for brain healing. Let's talk about dosage. So when you have a person that comes into your clinic, how do you dose them?
So we'll talk about both IV and oral. And, some of this, I don't know how much I want to say it's proprietary, but a lot of it was just trial and error on my part, that there was just no, you can ask around, everyone's doing something different. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't want to share what they're doing. So I'll kind of put as an overview style answer to that more than a specific. But I'll take what I consider a full dose for a patient, and full dose varies for IV just depending on what they're doing. But I'll usually start with a half dose of it and kind of see how they do with it. And then from there, I'll escalate up to full dose for it. And full dose is let's call it a marker of 1. I've pushed people, mainly Kyle, past 1, and I don't think the results were what he was hoping for. Remember that day?
Yeah, that was a lot. I've experimented with the dosing of methylene blue quite a bit, and it's night and day between IV and oral. So on oral, because of what the studies say, there's a lot of studies that test on 4 milligrams per kilogram. And so I tried that orally, and I felt really good. I felt sharp. I felt full of energy. Like I took less stimulants. I felt great. Dr. K gave me 2 of his doses, which is less than I was taking oral, much less. And I was like throwing up in the trash can because I was overstimulated. So that's just kind of a testament to how much harder the IV hits. How often would you recommend someone do methylene blue? I mean, is there like a course?
Yeah, so I do different courses for different things. If we're trying to treat, I mentioned that TRO effect earlier, which is basically a minimum and maximum concentrations in the blood. And so just on all the different studies I've gathered, if you're trying to treat cognitive decline, cognitive issues, you want to maintain a really high TRO concentration for as long as possible. So I'll have those people do IVs at least twice a week for 4 to 6 weeks.
46 weeks?
4 to 6.
Okay. I was like, whoa, that's an aggressive protocol.
That'd be like buying a house, my God. No, 4 to 6 weeks. Whereas if we're doing for an anti-pathogenic effect, I will typically do 1 a week or every other week. It kind of just depends on how the patient's tolerating it and how sick they are. But my favorite thing to do, methylene blue has really good synergistic effects with a lot of different other IVs I do. The main 3 things it works really well with are ozone, vitamin C, and procaine. So if I have patients that are doing any of the other stuff, I'll always try and combine them into the same day.
Very nice. So I do want to go back to the dosing orally because I mentioned 4 milligrams per kilogram is what I tried. That is the threshold in the literature. So there is a massive falling off of benefits after 4 milligrams of kilograms and a massive increase of side effects if you take more than that. And then I have seen studies where it's dosed at 0.5 milligram per kilogram and it's dosed at 2 milligrams per kilogram. And they seem to have a stair-stepping effect up to 4. But I would recommend that if anybody ever was going to try this, talk to your doctor first, of course. But I would try a 0.5 milligram per kilogram of body weight before you escalate to a higher dose. Low and slow is the way to go.
And when he's 2 points that when he says low and slow, it's not like, oh, I did 0.5 milligram today and I did great. Let me do 1 tomorrow. It's do it like every 2 weeks. You go up 0.5 milligram. That's one thing. And the second thing I want to point out, and like you mentioned, I'm not giving you guys medical advice, talk to your doctors, but 7 milligrams per kilogram is widely considered a deadly dose. So don't really stray above 4.
Yeah. So with oral, once you find out what you can tolerate and what's your optimal dose, some people like to use this like caffeine and start doing it daily. I have done it daily, and I've seen great effects. Of course, I've worked up to that. I didn't just start running it daily, and I have seen great effects. But should not run methylene blue permanently. So it'll overstimulate your mitochondria. Is that correct?
Correct. Your body starts to become reliant on it to a degree if you take it every single day because of how it works on what's called your Krebs cycle. Krebs cycle is a fancy word, Kreb, not crab, but it's the fancy word for our body's energy production through our mitochondria. And so, yeah, if you feed it methylene blue all the time, your body's going to become addicted to it and it'll stop working on its own. So my recommendation is you cycle on and off of it. Do like 4 to 6 weeks on, take 2 to 3 weeks off, and cycle like that.
Yeah. So I've been doing for a while cycles of 10 days on, 3 days off. I found that's pretty good. However, I don't actually like to push it to 10 because I realized that I actually was experiencing that effect that you mentioned, that kind of almost not feeling yourself when you come off it. And the third day, when it gets out of your system after that 10-day cycle, I'm just pissed off. I'm slow, I'm sluggish, and I'm not feeling good. Fourth day, I'm fine, but I don't like to go 10 days in a row anymore. So I try to cap it at about a 7-day cycle with a 3-day washout period minimum.
And I think that has to do with the doses that you're on such a high dose of it. I took his dose one time. I felt terrible. I take methylene blue regularly at like 20 to 40 milligrams a day. He gave me, 100 milligrams? I thought I was going to die. I was just nauseous. My stomach hurt. So I think his effects are happening because of his high dose.
Which makes sense. And I did step up over this dose. I mean, I didn't go to 4 milligrams per kilogram until probably a year and a half of using methylene blue. So I didn't just like run right to the top, although that is my personality generally. I didn't actually do that this time with this certain chemical. So we've talked a lot about oral and dosing and timing schedule. I mean, I'd like to talk a little bit about price and how the market works, how that works for IVs, what you see that, what I see, or the oral market and that kind of stuff.
Yep. So this is kind of a touchy, nervy subject for me. Methylene blue used to be IV-wise $10 a bottle. The pills were like pennies. Right up to 2015, the pharmaceutical company bought it. Price went up commercial grade to $1,500 per vial, and it sat there for a few years, which is why I feel like it kind of died out. No one can afford that because if doctors paying $1,500, they're charging probably $3,000 for an IV.
That's nuts.
Yeah, it kind of died out, and then 2019, 2020, it started getting compounded again on a regular basis. So the price has come down significantly. Never came down to $10 a vial though. And then recently, by recently I mean like October, the biggest producer of it, a company called TaylorMade, they stopped making the IV form of it. So the price has now jumped up again on it.
Gotcha. So from the oral standpoint, the price points are all over the place. I mean, it's up and down and left and right. The company I use, Mitozen, I think it's about $400 for 90 doses of 180 milligrams. That's about what they charge, which is a pretty decent price. I really like their product because one, again, I said the COA came back pretty decent, not quite as clean as that Amazon one you found, but it was pretty clean. And number two, they actually mix it with a bunch of polyphenols. And so it's kind of a double bang for your buck. So I've seen it as low as, like Amazon listings USP for a few bucks. And you got to like mix it yourself. It's a powder, and I find that's a nightmare. But usually I look for something like a 60 or 90 day supply under $400.
Well, so that's what's interesting. So I was getting it from a pharmacy in Florida that has unfortunately shut down called Amex, and we're getting it for about $1.50 compounded for 10 to 20 milligrams. When they shut down, I reached out to my friend. I shout out to Tom at Jupiter Compounding. It's like, hey, can you get this for me? He said there's no way he could touch that $1.50 price. He'd be sitting somewhere around, don't quote me, but I think he said about $4 a pill for 10 to 20 milligrams. So the prices for it are just, like you said, all over the place.
They're all over the place. Yeah, 10 to 20 milligrams. So that breaks down to, $4 a pop. You can get maybe 100 doses for $400. So like a compounding pharmacy version of this is comparable to the pricing of the Mitozen one. The difference is you'll get 10 or 20 milligrams through the compounding pharmacy and 180 at the Mitozen. But again, it goes to kind of your level of security and your level of risk. Your compounding pharmacies are always going to have generally the cleanest products. And then it'll step down from there and you'll find like chemical suppliers that'll have USP grade. Those are the sketchiest.
Yeah.
So have you heard anything about this light effect that that methylene blue has a synergistic effect with the body when interacting with certain types of light?
Yes. So there's topical methylene blue has to be photoactivated with red light therapy to actually work. And then for IV, now there's this whole debate about IV and photodynamic therapy for methylene blue.
So methylene blue, we've talked about basically all the aspects of it. Overall, is there anything we've missed in covering in methylene blue?
Actually, let me bring up this one. Its use in UTIs. Methylene blue, because it's so anti-pathogenic, that's part of why it's so good for UTIs. The second part is it accumulates in a really high concentration in kidneys and therefore bladder. And so people with resistant UTIs, methylene blue is one of the best things you give them, either oral or IV. Probably a mix of both. Give them one IV if you can, just to get the concentrations up really high, and then put them on orals for 10 days. And 99% chance you're going to kill whatever bacteria that is.
So I was correct earlier. It is the kidneys. So the IV has a higher concentration in the brain and the kidneys. So if you're working on something like renal impairment, would that be beneficial?
I don't know, because renal impairment has to do with the filtering effects of the kidneys. I don't know that methylene blue affects that, to be honest. If that's a road you want to go down, we're going to have a whole different episode about that.
So I think we've covered everything, just about everything on methylene blue. Now, if you'll indulge me, I'd like to dive into contraindications a little bit, side effects a little bit more, and what you can and can't take it with. I'll let you kind of go over the contraindications and the side effects, any you've ever seen, and then I'll dive into the interactions.
Yep. So contraindications, like I mentioned earlier, the biggest one is we do not take it without a G6PD test. I don't care if you're taking a quarter of a tablet, don't even lick it without a G6PD test. Because if you are one of those people that has no G6PD, it could end very badly. That's my biggest disclaimer. The next one is you cannot take it with SSRI medications. They've done studies that show it can cause serotonin syndrome, or it can also act as what's called MAOI inhibitor. Serotonin syndrome, I'm going to let Kyle talk about that one a little bit more, and you guys will find out why. But those are the two biggest contraindications. Pregnancy, I'm not 100% if it's safe in pregnancy. So with that one, ask your doctor about it, see what they say.
So we've mentioned there might be some gut issues, and I think that was the only side effect we've mentioned. You see anything else?
So orally, I pretty much only see GI side effects, but done IV, occasionally I get people in the office, they feel a little bit dizzy or out of it. That's normal. It normally goes away, usually by the end of the IV, sometimes shortly after. What I think is it's going up into their brain and doing brain things, and so it's a process of cleaning out the brain. They have that effect. The other thing people get with the IV for some reason is really strong cramping of the muscles of the arm, either up or down from the IV. Up at least sort of makes sense to me. Down, I could not figure out why they're feeling. If the IV is in their elbow, why are they feeling cramping in their forearm? I have no idea. But that one goes away usually within a couple hours after finishing the IV. That's the only stuff I've seen.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and dive into kind of drug interactions, what you should and shouldn't take it with, what you should be careful about. And I'm going to step back a little bit because we said it had positive benefits in the brain, but I don't think we mentioned how it acts on the blue spot in the brain. The blue spot is a specific spot in your brain that helps regulate your serotonin. And this research is often touted by Dr. John Lawrence down in Sarasota. He's the one that actually operates Mitozen. And he's given a lot of really good presentations on the science of methylene blue. And he's actually got a really good book, and we'll link to that in the show notes, about methylene blue. And he goes crazy with it. He's got eye drops with a little bit of EDTA, a little bit of silver, and methylene blue. It's called Blue Eyes. You put it in your eyes. He's saying he's seen visual improvement because of the mitochondrial stimulant effect in the eyes. And it can also clear up eye infections. Yeah. So, but back to the interactions. And this is something that biohackers might struggle with. When it comes to nootropics and messing with your brain and your neurochemicals, there's a lot of delicate things you're messing with. And as a biohacker, I've messed some of these up before, quite frankly. And the first one Dr. K mentioned is SSRIs. So You don't want to take methylene blue with anything that's modulating your serotonin syndrome or your serotonin system, because you could have an overload of serotonin giving you serotonin syndrome. Now, what I did is I took methylene blue, a very high dose of methylene blue, and then I took a microdose of psilocybin. Psilocybin is known to increase, it's actually how it works, your serotonin. That ended up giving me a minor case of serotonin syndrome in which my heart rate was through the roof. I was sweating uncontrollably, but I felt great, but I felt like I was dying. It was this weird, like I'm happy, but I feel like I'm dying. So be very careful when you're taking things that modulate your neurochemicals. Includes SSRIs, definitely mushrooms or hallucinogenics. If you take a very high dose of mushrooms or hallucinogenic psychedelics on methylene blue, you could die. Another one for biohackers, it's often used for weight loss, is tesofensine. There seems to be some interaction there because it's a reuptake agonist. I believe I have that right. And so I would stay away from tesofensine as well when you're on methylene blue. And the last is, it's sneaky. The last one is very sneaky. It's actually 5-HTP, which is serotonin. So doctors can prescribe serotonin. Some people are on this. And so you would probably know not to take methylene blue if you take serotonin. But what a lot of people don't know is serotonin is slipped into probably half of all sleep supplements. It's just in there. It's just lurking. And sleep supplements are highly unregulated. So the dosage on there, even though it's small, it could be much higher than they say it is. And so you could give yourself serious side effects if you're on a high dose of methylene blue and then take a sleep supplement that has a fairly decent dose of serotonin at 5-HTP in it. So you need to be very careful about taking sleep supplements when you're on methylene blue.
Makes sense. And then I just want to point out my favorite side effect, which isn't really a bad one. It's that it turns your urine anything from yellow to blue to green to something in between. And methylene blue, it's a blue IV, and then it comes out of you blue too. And sometimes you get green because yellow P plus blue IV makes green P.
Yeah. This is something to be careful with, because if you're taking high dose oil, you can stain your toilet.
Actually, yes, I've had a couple wives in the office complaining that their husbands are doing that, and I was like, I don't know what to tell you. I'm sorry.
You know what actually helps a lot? And this is a weird tip, but if you pre-flush, it'll actually prime the toilet so it's nice and wet, and it won't let it get into the porcelain as much.
That makes sense. The other thing is rubbing alcohol takes. I get on my skin all the time when I'm mixing up the IVs. Rubbing alcohol takes it out of most things.
Nice. Yeah. So it's actually, if you're cutting doses like in the Mitozen product, it is a pain in the butt because it'll dye anything very blue for a while.
And then actually, so the peeing blue, green, whatever color, I want to make a point on that. I have people that'll do the IV because it's a little more noticeable when you're taking the IV and not the pills every day. If you take the pill every day, you can pee blue every day. But they'll do the IV one time and they'll pee blue anywhere from the first pee after all the way to 4 to 5 days later. And we cannot figure out why. That's one thing that no one's found, is why the length of urine color change varies so much. And they used to track it. And for a while, I had this theory that, if it's fighting off an infection, it gets burnt up, it gets mutated into something else, and therefore you don't pee blue. Whereas if it goes in your brain, it's doing something to your brain, then you're going to pee blue for longer. The problem is it wasn't consistent. It wasn't even consistent patient IV1 to IV2, let alone between patients. So I gave up on that theory.
So I actually do know a little bit about this. At least one specific thing about it. I don't know why in some people it lasts longer and why in some people it's shorter, but if you have a high amount of serum vitamin C or you're taking vitamin C has a reaction with methylene blue that actually turns it clear. So that could be something that you might see in your clinic. If you dose with vitamin C, you'll see it for much shorter time.
So I combine methylene blue with vitamin C on a semi-regular basis. I'll have to track that one and see where it ends up. I'll report back in like 6 months.
Yeah, there we go. So is there anything we've missed, Dr. K, on methylene blue? I think this is probably one of the most comprehensive podcasts out there on methylene blue.
I haven't found one where they've covered all these things yet.
Let's hear about your experience. Have you taken it at all?
I've done it both IV and orally. Typically, I don't take it consistently anymore. I took it, like I mentioned earlier in the show, I've done the 4 weeks on, 2 weeks off. I did that for a few months, and definitely noticeably sharper. Nowadays, I really take it if I have a late night or if I'm flying and it's upsetting my sleep schedule, I'll take it next morning, because what I've found, is it protects your brain tissue as much as a pill can. And then I've done the IV a few times, and doing the IV, normally I do the IV the day of. I'm like, okay, I don't feel much. And normally I wake up next morning like, okay, I am noticeably sharper. I can solve puzzles I've been thinking about for a while and couldn't solve. When did you feel like you were inventing Facebook, Kyle?
That was after I puked in your trash can. So I got overwhelmed. And then about an hour and a half later, when I was going home, I was like, my brain was just like seeing things I haven't seen before. I was like on super speed. I was like singing rap songs, and I was like hitting every lyric. And then while I was doing that, I was thinking about business things. It was nuts.
So as a caveat to that, I think healthy people with really healthy brains, they get that effect. Most of my patients don't feel it to that degree, because unfortunately, I think that it's a confirmation bias, right? Most of the patients are sick, not doing it for fun. So when they do it, it's being utilized for something useful and not just extra.
Yeah, that makes sense. One last thing I saw with my use and journey of Methylene Blue, when I was on a weight loss journey previous to starting to take Methylene Blue, and I hit a pretty solid plateau at about 230-ish pounds. And then I started taking Methylene Blue, and it seems like I had an issue creating enough energy. So that Methylene Blue blew through that weight loss plateau, and I lost about 20 more pounds over the course of 2 months because of Methylene Blue usage. I didn't change anything else: diet, exercise, any other supplements. So it could be a useful tool in weight loss if you need it. If your mitochondria are going through, the Krebs cycle is working well and you're producing the maximum ATP, you might not get that benefit. But if you actually are ran down and you need that boost, then it might be huge for helping you utilize the energy from your food more effectively.
Makes sense.
You got something else?
I was going to point out some history that just came to mind if you guys want to hear it. So it came to me. The reason that they started using Methylene Blue in people and figured out it works as medication is they knew it was a dye, so they started adding it to psychiatric medications to make sure that the patients were actually taking it. They take it, urine turns blue, they're taking it. And then from there, that's where it started to develop into its psychotropic effects, which are like anti-psychiatric issue medications. It was using Methylene Blue is how they discovered chlorpromazine. It's one of the oldest anti-psychotic drugs out there. That's where the shift of textile dye to medication came from.
Very interesting. Good to close the loop on that. Well, I think we have put together one of the most comprehensive podcasts on Methylene Blue. Any final notes for us, Dr. K?
That's all I've got.
Excellent. Well, we are signing off, and if you want to learn more or follow up with us, you can go to our website. It's peakperformancepodcast.online, not .com, because .com was taken. So we went with .online because it seems like it makes sense. It's online. Also, we are on Instagram, Twitter. We are also on Instagram personally. I'm at ToxinFreeKyle, and Dr. K is at The OsteoDoc. And we'll have links to those in the show notes as well. And you can find our full show notes at our website.
Thanks, everybody, for listening. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Peak Performance Podcast, your #1 resource for today's top health hacks and facts. You can follow us on Instagram at the Peak Performance Pod or on X at Peak Perform Pod. You can also check out our website and weekly blogs at peakperformancepodcast.online. Again, thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe. We put out a new podcast every Thursday. The content of this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended for the purposes of diagnosing, treating, curing, or preventing any disease. Before using any products referenced on the podcast, consult with your healthcare provider, carefully read all labels, and heed all directions and cautions that accompany the product. Information found or received through the podcast should not be used in place of a consultation or advice from a healthcare provider. If you suspect you have a medical problem or should you have any healthcare questions, please promptly call or see your healthcare provider. This podcast, including Coach Kyle, Dr. K, and producers, disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of the information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain paid endorsements and advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein.